Hey, everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. We're going to have a special conversation today. We're back in the barbershop and the beauty shop. Yep, we are doing a twofer beauty shop, barbershop conversation because every once in a while, I like to invite a few people on the podcast to, get it all together at the same time. And we may not always agree on everything, but the reality of it is we can have a lot of fun and a good combo, which we will do when we bring to the table, we're not bringing them to the table, we're bringing them to the chair. Bring to the chair Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary under President Joe Biden, and the host of Inside with Jen Psaki on MSNBC. Don Calloway, an attorney, Democratic strategist, and a contributor and colleague over at MSNBC. And Tim Miller, who is a writer at large for The Bulwark, MSNBC political analyst, and former political director for Republican Voters Against Trump and communications director for Jeb Bush 2016. Y'all got to stick around for this one. Y'all may want to get a little bit of Kool-Aid and, maybe a bag of chips and settle back for a great conversation with Jen, Don, and Tim right here on the Michael Steele podcast right after this. What up, everybody? Welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. Well, this is a very special and somewhat unique time together because, I do the barbershop thing from time to time, and I've done a beauty shop where I get the ladies together. Well, this is the first time where the beauty shop meets the barbershop, and we just gonna hang out and do our thing. And I'm excited to have Jen Psaki, the first lady to step inside the barbershop with us.
I am honored. First of all, I'm so happy to be in the barbershop. Wouldn't want to be in the barbershop with two other people, but thanks for inviting me to be a part of it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you got the cut going. I'm loving your cut, so it's working.
Thank you. I brushed my hair for you today, Michael. Only for you.
We appreciate that. I had a little bit too much taken off the top, but we're working that out too.
Next time.
We're all good. So it's great to see you, Tim, Don. Always a pleasure hanging out with you, brother. Glad you guys could be a part of the conversation today.
I got a fresh fade for you yesterday, Michael. I saw this on my calendar, and I was like, I want to focus on the banter, and so I just want to be nice and high and tight.
There you go, high and tight, baby. That's how we roll. That's how we do it.
Tim's hair looks good too. It looks good
Thank
too.
You.
He's got some product in there, maybe.
Oh yeah, just a little
bit. And I'm jealous of the Don look there. I'm like, Don, dude,
Come on.
Brother, I can't. I tried the side with this. It didn't work. I wound up looking like Bozo. So I just.
I'm about 10 months in trying to grow dreadlocks, but I've reached the point where I'm like, yo, am I actually rich enough that I can say F the system and grow it out? I don't think I'm there yet. And I watch a few too many like Jay-Z interviews and he's real free. And I'm not there yet. So I think I'm going to cut it off some point this week, go back to school with a fresh sense of respectability, and we'll see what happens from there.
All right. Well,
respectfully disagree. One man's vote here, okay? But I respectfully disagree.
I'm going to add my vote there, too.
Yeah, I'm going to add mine, too.
Don't shave it off.
Give it a little bit more.
I will tell you the most important vote is not here. My girlfriend doesn't like it.
So, well, never mind.
Okay. Forget it.
Yeah, you need to cut. You should have cut that shit off about a week ago then.
Yeah, exactly. What she says goes.
What's crazy is she made that extraordinarily clear. You know how, like, this is going to sound horrible, but whatever. You know how women are, like, they'll mention something 6 months ago.
I do. I actually do know how.
Bring it up. And now the frequency is getting there, and it's a little more, like, intense.
Well, you know why that is. I can tell you after 37 years of marriage why that is. Because you didn't hear her the first time when she articulated very clearly what her intent was. You missed that moment. So in her polite way, she's been trying to get you to understand, I don't like it.
Mike, you got enough female voters, man. You're supposed to be standing with me here, bro. You got enough. Yeah. You got enough female listeners. They like you. Come on, man. You ain't got to patronize to them. Man.
Dude. I'm just trying to help a brother out.
I can inform Don and Michael that when a woman says something like, "Is that what you're going to wear to this event?" That means don't wear this to that event.
That's exactly what that means.
So Don, it's fall now. If you thought about cutting your hair, she means cut your hair. There you go. I'm here to translate for you.
And what you also need to understand in what Jen just said, we do not have the privilege of saying to her, so is that what you're going to
Oh,
wear
no.
to the cocktail party? No. You just come out and go, no, you looking fine as ever. Thank you. Let's go.
Oh, hey,
There you go.
that's right. That's
I've
right.
never been happier to be gay than right now. I'm just thrilled listening to this
Oh,
combo.
Hey,
I will
Tim,
say, yeah,
don't play that off, brother. Come on now.
Right.
You
There's
know
pro-
damn well it works the same in your world as it does in our world. Don't think it's
Exactly.
always good to be gay-ish because you've had those conversations.
Tim and I have had combos before, and Don and Michael, this may work for you, and like as word, this may be a balance for you guys as well. As to like who in your partnership plans the schedule, right? Like plans events and like all of the activities and things. There's always one, you know?
Actually,
And the
and
one who's not the planner is always like just like along for the ride in some ways, you know?
And getting in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a four-letter word to me. I am not part of the planning ministry of anybody's church. I am part of the good times ministry. And apparently, as a finance, as a dad, I'm apparently part of the finance ministry as well. I'm expected to pay for it, but I ain't putting together the plan. That's just not. That's not in my world.
Just along for the ride.
You're always expected to pay for
Okay.
it.
We've identified where you stand, Don. It's all good.
Yes, indeed.
See,
Yes, indeed.
I
Everybody's got a
plan,
purpose.
but I get permission. So
That's fair.
there's always a veto. He can plan all day.
Always
There's
a veto.
always a veto. So guys, I want to get into what has been one of the more fascinating 7 days since the Republican debate last week. There's so many tracks, and I've watched and listened to a lot of your commentary during that time, and there's a consistent theme in it, and that is this doesn't get better. This gets a lot harder and a lot worse in so many respects. Let's just start with your thoughts, 3,000-foot level thoughts on what we've seen transpire inside the GOP hotspot of, the rise of Vivek Ramaswamy, the largely ignoring of a Nikki Haley, who I thought had the best performance. And Tim and I think you and I were on together at one point after that debate talking about that. You had a slightly different take on it. Certainly how Donald Trump is not only weathered, but gotten stronger in this particular storm between folks who supposedly want to take his spot as the Republican nominee and the criminal justice system that wants to put him in jail. How are you guys seeing this right now? Jen, I'll start with you and get your thoughts, and we'll get deeper into it as we go.
Well, look, politics is always unpredictable, which is why we all love it so much. But I think the question is, does any question that doesn't have to do with Donald Trump actually matter? And right now, I would say it probably doesn't. Right. Now, I would say looking at the debate last week, and I've watched and listened to what you guys have said. I mean, the fact that everybody ignored Ron DeSantis, people didn't really attack him. He didn't.
Notice I didn't even mention him.
I know, but he was the front runner on that stage, right? I mean, he was the person who was going to challenge Trump. People didn't attack him. He didn't have memorable moments aside from kind of a very strange, dark, grievance-ridden thing about immigrants near the end. That's telling. But on the Trump front, what's been interesting to me, if you look at the totality of the last week or 10 days, is for the first time, he kind of feels like, and he looks like he's lost a little bit of control of the narrative. It doesn't mean he won't be the nominee. I'm not suggesting that, but the date was set for the arguably, and I would argue, the most important trial of all of them, and maybe the most important trial in most of our lives, not to be overly dramatic, but it probably is true, for the day before Super Tuesday. It may be wrapped up before then, and this is the one overturning the outcome of the election and Trump's role.
Right.
The nomination may be wrapped up by then, but it is hard to argue that it is good to be, even if you're the nominee, to be stuck in a courtroom right when you're supposed to be gathering momentum and expanding your base of support. So that, to me, is one of the most important things that has happened. And the other piece that I have observed is these judges are just not messing around. whether they're aware or not aware of politics, they care or don't care. They're not supposed to care about politics. I think it's worth stating. They are tough, and they all seem to be, at least in my assessment, for the most part, to be kind of ready for this moment to push back. We'll see. We'll keep evaluating week by week, but those are some of my takes from the last 10 days.
Tim, you guys, you and Charlie Sykes, and Vilas and a bunch of guys at Bulwark have been really kind of nailing this narrative. Talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing and the takeaways that you've drawn, particularly when you're looking at, the potential threat that still lies ahead in 2024. I think a lot to what Jen is saying. I don't think the legal stuff is going to be as much of an impediment to the continual erosion as some people may think. But give us some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So just first, really quick on the look back of the last 7 days, and then to the threats. I think that I appreciate everybody listening to the Bulwark podcast and watching the Jen Psaki show that I got to guest on and listening to. I appreciate everybody for listening to all these takes, but man, if in mid-August you decided you're just going to binge on Red, White, and Royal Blue and read Crime and Punishment and turn off the TV and the podcast, and you came on today, you would have been fine, because nothing really changed in this primary last week. That debate, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of discussion, a lot of opportunity maybe for somebody to do something, and nobody did it. I mean, Nikki Haley, we can do that thing. She, I think, displaced Tim Scott as like the great hope of the donor class. That's not actually gonna, there aren't enough voters to get her over the top. I thought she had a good debate, but Donald Trump is the dominant force. He was dominant before the debate. He's dominant now. He's dominant before the mugshot. He's dominant now, and not much else really changed. Little bits on the margins. As far as going forward, my top view is I think that the threats are very real. Like, my sense of alarm is high. Both in the potential violent threats when you speak to that, and the threats of potentially Trump winning. I just think both these things we cannot sleepwalk into. Donald Trump being in court on the day of Super Tuesday. I don't know how his super fans are going to respond to all that. We know he's going to stoke them. We know he's going to make them think that this is the system coming after them. It only takes a couple of people that are a little bit deranged, that have access to firearms to create a lot of trouble. So I don't want to fear monger here. I'm just saying, like, that's a real sense of alarm I think we should have. And then I think that, looking ahead, we're now a year out, a little over a year out from the general election. I wish that Joe Biden was up by 20 points. I wish we were staring down a 1984 landslide, but we're not. We're not. And the Electoral College plays to Trump's benefit. We all have talked about that. And man, a Trump second term, as horrible as the first term was, is just I don't think a lot of people have let sink in like what the people that would be around him would look like. There were not. I wasn't really a big fan of the whole there are bumpers on Trump's take in the first administration, but there were some bumpers. There weren't a lot, but there were some. There'd be none in a second term. So I just think both those things are extremely alarming and threatening. And I just think that's sort of our role at the Bulwark, to be raising the flag on that, because it's easy to kind of just get into the the nitty gritty of the commentary and not kind of think about that big picture.
Yeah, Don, I think that one of the key things in what Tim just said for me has just been, when I'm looking back over the last 7 days and watching the continuing evolution of Trump's resiliency in the face of all of the crap that's coming at him, and that he just embraces. You do still have this thing where, as Tim noted, Joe Biden is not 20 points ahead. In fact, Democrats are eating at Joe Biden right now more than Republicans are. He's a snack for us. He's a main meal still for Democrats. So how does that play into the context of this emerging narrative as we head into the fall, where people then do begin to focus a little bit more on the political horse race and begin to size up these candidates? And if you got Democrats sizing up their lead horse as lame,
Yeah.
What does that say about going into 2024?
Well, it's never great that you're in a jump ball with an objectively heinous, twice indicted, or 4 times indicted, twice impeached guy, right? There's no
Right.
real objective universe in which this person should be a serious candidate for civic leadership, right? But and so that's not good. But we've always known, as much as we love him, we've always known that Joe Biden doesn't inspire a whole lot of passions and just he doesn't inspire a whole lot of Democrats to get out and get motivated. Joe Biden is pepperoni pizza. All of us have hosted family gatherings and we have gotten tired of the back and forth over what type of pizza we're gonna have. So a grown up in the room says we're gonna have this pepperoni and you motherfuckers is gonna like it.
Right.
Now here we are
That's
4
true.
years later and we still have not moved on past pepperoni pizza, but that's okay because pepperoni pizza is what's needed for this crazy time, right?
Right.
And that's all right, particularly when you talk about the challenges of being a Democrat. For better or for worse, we all still exist in a two-party system, right? And being a Democrat is historically and presently the party of the big tent. We got a whole lot of folks, right, to try to, if not satisfy, at least acknowledge, right? And I think that whether or not we feel that he's dynamic or whatever else, I think he's actually extraordinarily underrated. And you can look at his legislative agenda to show what he's gotten done. But yeah, look, yes, he's an old white dude, but that's okay because that might be what the country needed right now to bring stability to this extraordinarily treacherous political moment. And we can talk about it in terms of being unstable because of what this means for who's going to be the speaker, or in terms of using the legislative process to do things like create these committees on the weaponization of federal government that make Republicans look like, ultimate victims. Yeah, all that's unstable, but that's a beltway thing. I'm talking about real instability if you're at the Tops grocery store in East Buffalo. Real
Right.
instability if you're at Edward Waters College or in Jacksonville. Real instability if you're at the Squirrel Hill Synagogue in Pittsburgh, right? Pepperoni pizza is the best thing to help us move a little bit past that mark, right? And a return to not only Donald Trump, but his acolytes, right? The Ron DeSantis's, the Vivek Ramaswamy's, who, by the way, ain't too far removed from being a rapper named Devek up in Boston and Harvard, but is somehow now a serious candidate for civic leadership. We have to move past that. Pepperoni pizza is okay to move past that.
Now,
and I know I'm being long-winded.
I like Joe Biden. I'm not saying this, but what if the pepperoni pizza is 4 days old?
Or has
are we a
pineapples
little worried
on it?
about that? I'm sorry, the metaphor.
Listen,
I'm extending the metaphor to
over.
death, maybe, but
well, listen. In the absence of a better alternative, this is what's best for all of us right now. And I'll say,
but Don, picking up on Tim's point, not only is the pizza 4 days old, but you got folks at the barbecue insisting on putting pineapples on that shit. You're like, wait a minute.
But then you have on the other side, you have like rotting liver and like wilted Brussels sprouts, right? So it's like, it's all a choice. Are you going to eat the 4-day-old?
So everybody's getting food poisoning. Is that what?
Or you're going to, yeah. I mean, it's like a little, and I would say, I do think that the biggest problem that the Biden team has, one of the biggest problems, is what Don just touched on, which is like exciting and engaging the base of the party, who you need to turn out. The base, and you always want the base of the party to be excited about your candidate. That is the ideal.
Jen, I mean, isn't all the shit that's happened around us exciting enough? What the hell do they need to be excited about?
My point is that, well, you always want people to be excited about the person. They hate Trump, right? And that is exciting and engaging. And so you've got
an authoritarian moment for this country.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah,
I can't sit there and get, if I can't get your juices fired up after what you've seen over the last 8 years, I don't know what will do it. I mean, for me in 2020, in endorsing and supporting Joe Biden, it wasn't about, oh, well, yeah, this is an old white guy and I got another old white guy to choose from. I'm like, this is a moment. This is about the country in this direction. So this is the thing that sort of unnerves me about Democrats. they're so damn short-sighted about the thing that's the most important thing right now, that they're worried about stuff that don't matter. I mean, Joe Biden is not going to throw out the head of the FBI and put in someone who will give him absolute authority and back him up. He's not going to have a vice president that's going to stand there at a critical moment and say, you know what, I have the power to throw out all this shit and do it the way we want to do it. I don't know if that doesn't excite you.
Well, no, I'm making the point you're making, right?
Okay.
You may feel like he doesn't look like me. He's 80. I need somebody who knows more, cares more, is experiencing the payback of student loans. I get that's all understandable. And there's lots of young and exciting Democrats out there. And you always want, when you're working for a candidate, we all know this, for people to actually be excited about that candidate. But this may be about how much they hate the other side and the hatred of Trump. And that is a motivator. I will say, having worked in Democratic politics for 20 years, Democrats do love to bedwet, to hate on each other, to cannibalize.
We should be bedwetting, though. Everybody's sheets should be
No.
mentorated on right now. Like, there's a lot to, yeah. So I'm with the Democrats on bedwetting right now.
Bedwetting is important sometimes, but I will also say Democrats also look for like the purple unicorn, right? It's like you want the person who has 40 years of experience navigating and working with people of both parties, except not too much, and also foreign policy experience, but you also want them to be 35. And, it's like no candidate has all of the perfect things. I think there are a lot of exciting people who are in their 40s and 50s, and that's great for the Democratic Party. But that is also part of how the party operates. It's part of how having a huge umbrella, which is a good thing.
Don?
Yeah. I mean, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, right? So we are always looking for the person that Jen called the unicorn. But I think that each of us have been through enough mango seasons to understand something that my home state Senator Claire McCaskill told me years ago. She said, listen, a lot of folks back home are watching MSNBC. A whole lot of folks back home are watching Fox, but most people back home are watching Dancing with the Stars. Yeah. And what I think she was trying to express was, we can get caught up in this horse race so deep, right? And thinking about who had the best performance on 7 days ago. And that really doesn't matter, because these things are going to break in August, a year from now. What Joe Biden needs to do between now and then is, just keep his hands on the tiller, right? Let's not have a huge natural disaster that's mismanaged. Let's not have a huge terrorist attack that's mismanaged. And of course, these October surprises and things can happen. But I think that people are going to start paying attention a year from now. And I do believe that a year from now, a couple of different things can happen electorally. I need white men of my age to get tired of dealing with Trump and to make a collective decision that, yes, I'm a good person, I'm a Republican, but it's time to move on, and let's fight this battle again in 2028 in the Republican primaries, and let's start to make our party look sensible again. And I think I need brothers to say, hey, man, I don't care what you think Trump is. Don't. You better not do that. You cannot come back here and feel safe doing that, because I'm seeing a whole lot of posts from lower middle class Black men talking about how they actually like Trump. They don't. They like the ability to which he is able to succeed monetarily by living a shameless life. Right. And that's a privilege that we've never really had, being a young Black man in the hood. I think
and won't have.
And you will never have.
America's not going to translate that shit the same way, and they know that.
You will never have that. That's right. So I need those two groups to get in line, and once they do, I think Joe Biden wins again, and then we can start thinking about who's our exciting candidate for 28, and Republicans can start thinking about how to return common sense and decency back to their party.
So
Trump will be back in 28 too after all that.
Absolutely.
So, we're not letting you off the hook that easy.
Can I ask you, Michael, a question? Maybe you, Tim, I don't know. I mean, there are still candidates. I mean, there are still, I like thinking of the footage I've seen of like young Republicans, and this is, Don, you were making me think about this. Say like, I liked what Vivek Ramaswamy had to say. He's really like, so my question is like, you both work multiple Republican, for multiple Republican campaigns, candidates. It's like, is this just a Trump problem? What about the
No,
people
it's
looking for Vivek
deep.
Ramaswamy and they think, well, Trump is old, but that guy's the future?
Well, on that point, Tim's colleague, Will Salatin, writes in the Bulwark today, quote, Vivek Ramaswamy is running for president as the heir to Donald Trump. Like Trump, he disdains political experience, rejects institutional constraints, and floats authoritarian ideas. He has proposed raising the voting age for most people to 25. He has vowed to purge 75% of the federal workforce. He wants to eliminate numerous agencies, including the FBI, the Centers for Disease Control, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And he has suggested that if Congress doesn't comply, he will impose such sweeping changes by executive order and dare the courts to stop him. Ramaswamy, who is already polling third and rising in the Republican field, has promised to pardon Trump on all of his 91 felony charges, even if everything alleged in the indictments of Trump is proved. But at the same time, he says President Joe Biden committed crimes, should be imprisoned for life, and should never get a pardon. Now Ramaswamy has issued another starker threat against American democracy. He has made it clear that as vice president, he would be willing to block congressional certification of his own defeat.
And he thinks climate change is a hoax.
And he thinks climate change is a
Another
hoax.
thing.
Tim?
Yeah, well, that guy's a little high on his own supply, I think. He's trying really hard. And the one thing we got going for us with Vivek versus Trump is nobody has quite figured out. Part of the reason why Trump is so dangerous is kind of what Don was just getting to, is that there's a certain type, like he's likable for a certain type of person, right? Like never for me. He repulsed me always, but I can see it. He's kind of funny. Every once in a while he makes me laugh. And Vivek and all of his imitators so far have been very try-hardy, severe, and weird, or some combination of all three. And Vivek, touches on all those points. And so I think that misses some of the casual Trump support and sort of runs you into the MAGA nationalist fascist like corner of the party, which is disturbingly high, but is limited in their broad appeal. That's why none of these assholes won in the midterms, thank God. Weird, creepy Blake Masters got, slaughtered by Mark, Kelly, because like this Trump imitation doesn't work if you're not likable.
He seemed like a nice guy, Tim.
Oh, did he? Yeah, kind of like a Patrick Bateman, like a softer Patrick Bateman. Anyway, here's the worrying thing. Is that so I went to Louisiana Republican convention on Friday just to kind of get a sense of where the people are at. And I was most interested in, I went up to everybody under 30 and I was like, who do you like in the primary? Just to try to get in touch. Every person said, well, Trump or Vivek. One young woman said Nikki Haley. God love her. Thumbs up to her. But that's worrying. And I think that there is a problem, a bottom-up problem within the party that we're not going to fix on this podcast, right? That there's a certain plurality, maybe not a bare majority, but a very significant minority of the party that wants the MAGA fascist stuff. And they like that. And like, that's what they're there for. And they want the libs to be owned. They want Jen Psaki to cry. And that's probably about 40% of the party. So that's a disturbing problem. I don't know how to fix at this moment. What is though relevant is that, that person that Don was talking about, the white guy of our age, the 40-year-old dad type, the Wall Street Journal reading dad, like the project that we have to undertake for the next short term and medium term is making sure that person understands like who they're in bed with and peel them off. And that's been happening slowly already. That's why Donald Trump lost Georgia, is those Atlanta suburban dads. It's also the black women that turned out and the young voters, but sometimes the dads in the Atlanta suburbs get forgotten about. They're part of the reason why Joe Biden's president. We got to keep peeling those people off, because the party thing, what Vivek shows is that there is a substantial portion of the party, maybe even a majority of the party, that wants the Trump imitation. And so even if Jack Smith puts him in jail, they're going to find somebody else that looks like him, that maybe doesn't have quite as many of the mental derangements, which is nice, but has a lot of the bad policies.
Yeah, I'm so ready to move past Red State Andrew Yang, Vivek Ramaswamy. Right? He has said so many dumb things. Like, forget about the idea he's a Republican. He said so many dumb things that he's kind of disqualified from being a serious candidate, right? Black people won their freedom because of the proliferation of the Second Amendment. Fundamentally false. He has this. Climate change is a hoax, and the way we're going to save the energy crisis in this country is by making more efficient heating and cooling window units. That's his plan, right? The idea that he would subvert democracy from the Mike Pence seat 4 years ago. These are like his substantive plans that he's put out into the world, none of which are anything that a serious person would think about. And it goes back to this notion that one of the major flaws of Trump and his imitators is that governing is a practice. It is a profession that requires some level of experience or expertise or knowledge. And I think on both sides, actually Democrats don't really advance unexperienced people. But I think we're all prone to celebrity and we're all prone to novelty. And what you get out of that is a person who has no experience being a serious contender, or at least a talked about contender for an office that actually needs experience because it has real ramifications for real people's lives, right? How much does your insurance cost? Do you get flood insurance or not, depending upon whether you live? These are things that a presidential agenda has serious implications for. And I don't think that, I mean, God bless them, our brothers and sisters watching Dancing with the Stars. I don't think that they understand the ramifications of that. And I would like to see politics on both sides move towards that. Listen, I never thought that I would be in a position where I am today of wishing I could do battle with a George W. Bush acolyte every day and talk about politics, right? And talk about why you're wrong and why I'm right. And let's get to some type of common ground. We're dealing with people who don't know anything about this, right? And I think we've been in this long enough to understand that government has real levers that affect people's real day-to-day. And I don't care if it's, Tim Scott or Nikki Haley. I want to see both parties get back to somebody who knows what they're doing. And I think Joe Biden presents the extraordinarily valuable notion of somebody who knows what they're doing. I know I'm being long-winded. I'll close with this. The attack that will work on the Atlanta dads we're talking about is the idea that you're actually electing Kamala Harris, which is a fundamentally sexist and racist, bad attack. But that is what they're saying, and they said it before. There's always a boogeyman, be it Ebola or migrants or Willie Horton. The boogeyman this time is that you're actually electing Kamala Harris, and that's what we're going to have to defend against to get the Atlanta suburban dad.
Well, that raises a point I want to get to in a moment. We're going to take a quick break because I want to piece together two links that have been created by both Jen and Don. And that is taking a little deeper dive around this idea of the GOP running against Kamala and what that is really saying. But we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Jen, Tim, and Don right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're this great conversation. I'm like, sitting here. I don't even have to put anything in my coffee today. So I'm just living off the vibe from Tim and Don and Jen right now. Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary under President Biden and the host of Inside with Jen Psaki on MSNBC. Don Calloway, an attorney, Democratic strategist and contributor, and one of my colleagues as a contributor at MSNBC. And of course, my old friend Tim Miller, writer at large at The Bulwark, MSNBC political analyst, former political director for Republican voters against Trump and communications director for Jeb Bush, all back in the barbershop, beauty salon with us, having a great conversation. So before we went to break, Don, you had opened up a little bit before you made your last point, this idea about the white voters out there. Jen, you talked about that connection to folks out there and how it all kind of comes together. The reality of it is when we're looking at the Ramaswamis and others who are emerging narratively in the political space, you have this growing effort by a majority of GOP candidates, and this includes Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, people of color, making an appeal to GOP white conservative base voters and even non-GOP white conservative base voters, and how they've downplayed the existence of racism in the country, how they have narratively sidestepped or ignored the bullshit educational policies out of Florida right now, where, oh, guess what? my great granddaddy actually got job skills from being a slave. How does this approach impact those voters out there? How do they see, and read this? Tim, you sit in a lot of focus groups and working, as you just said, in the field, at various party events. What are you hearing and seeing out there with this ongoing narrative around race that seems to excite a lot of white folks, and potentially could depress a win next year?
Yeah, I'll be fast. I have a negative and a positive on this front. Here's the negative. Vivek, I think, is a prime example. Nikki and Tim Scott do this too, but in a less obnoxious way. So I don't know if you all know this, but Vivek has his 10 commandments, his 10 truths. He ends every speech with them. And one of his 10 truths, big, for people aren't watching on YouTube, big air quotes here, is reverse racism is racism. And that is a big applause line in Iowa, a big applause line. And I just think that is gives away the game here, right? That it's not like one of my truths is racism is a problem and we need to deal with it. Even if sometimes white people are being discriminated against. Now, I don't, I'm not big on white racism thing, but if you were making that point, then at least you're like, okay, this guy's trying to make an argument. That's not what the argument he's trying to make. It's a pure pander. It's just reverse racism is racism. You guys are the victims, actually. White people are the victims.
Right.
And that lands with a certain class of white voters. I do think, though, we saw in 2020 following George Floyd, and we saw this in our Bulwark focus groups, that when you get into that swing voter category, back to that Atlanta dad that we're talking about, and mom, I'm not trying to, leave anybody out here, but they don't really love that. And I think that is encouraging. And the group of people, my people, the people that have left the GOP, you and our people, Michael, white folks in the suburbs don't love this shit. And I think that it actually backfires among swing voters. So on net, how does that balance, right? It's activating, I think, working class whites, and it's activating the Republican base in a big way. It's harming them with gettable college educated voters. Where does that land on net? I'm not so sure, but I do think that it cuts both ways.
Don, what's your take on that?
Can you repeat the question? Because I was really kind of listening to Tim and Jen, and I forgot the original question.
No, it's this idea that the GOP candidates and the GOP writ large is making a very concerted and deliberate effort to court and bring back into the fold or elevate inside the political space the conservative white base that really doesn't want to hear anything about race right now.
Yeah, and the way they do that is by these deeply committed conservative faces of color who are willing to say the wild thing. You know what I mean? They're willing to go, and you get that with a Vivek, but that's not a new thing. We've seen that since the Tea Party, 2009, 2010. You started to see the African-American candidate with these wildly, if you could not see their faces, you would think they were members of the Klan, right? And so if you've been around long enough, you can kind of see this character popping up. Byron Donalds is doing it right now in Florida. He just doesn't have the platform of a presidential campaign. And you've seen it kind of.
I think he's on the VP shortlist. That Byron
there you
Donalds.
go, right? And that actually goes back to something that I've seen over the last 20 years being in politics. The line to shine as a person of color is much shorter on the Republican Party, right? And then once you get into the line of civic leadership, you can be elevated in this moment by being willing to say the craziest thing possible. Unfortunately, for most of these folks in 2023, Black folks are A, allowed to read, and B, we have access to the Google. So I know that I just happen to know that when Nikki Haley came over to this country, and her parents, as a first-generation immigrant, it was a Black college, Voorhees College, who gave her brown daddy a job as a college professor when he would not have gotten one at the University of South Carolina or Clemson or anywhere else. But she tells us that HBCUs don't matter, right? Her mama and grandmother opened a store called Exotica, had 2 locations, Orangeburg and Bamberg, South Carolina. Population of white folks between the 2 of them, about 50 people. And so it was Black women who supported her small business making dresses and trinkets and costume jewelry, right? But she won't talk about that part because she knows that the electorate in a Republican primary doesn't want to hear that.
Right.
So there are fundamental truths that are like provable, right? That go against these narratives they're saying, but it really kind of all goes into them buying into what they think the character of a politician has to be, like the persona of a Republican politician has to be. And it really makes you wonder, do y'all even really believe this?
Right.
Do you even really believe this stuff? And I just find that fascinating when you consider all three of them. I do think that Tim Scott is a deeply committed, charactered conservative, right? He believes this stuff in his heart. But I think that part of playing the role to succeed in his party is he has to deny some things in exchange for certain votes.
Jen, how do you read this right now?
Well, I mean, first of all, having worked for Barack Obama for 10 years, we can just go back to that a whole period of time and remind ourselves when there was a whole push on the right and right-wing Twitter sphere that he was born in Kenya. It had nothing to do with like moving the anti-Kenya constituency in the country, right? It was like, hey, everybody, this is a Black man running for president, right?
I'm raising my hand. I was fooled. I thought the Tea Party was about spending. That's my bad. I'm just throwing that. I'm throwing myself on the mercy of the court on that.
I could share a few meetings that I had with them over during that time, and I thought it was about the Constitution.
I mean, go figure. And now this also, again, right? Now I have Tim as the focus group Sarah Longwell and others do are so interesting, and I think tell us so much and are so important to listen to when people are putting their heads in the sand. But I've heard and I've talked to the Biden campaign and team about this question of like this argument that you hear anecdotally that if you vote for Joe Biden and that you are electing Kamala Harris, is it sticking out as a problem in your focus groups and in your polling? At this point, they say no for the reasons Tim outlined. Right. Now, sometimes, as we all know, anecdotal things aren't quite there yet and how we're seeing them in polls and data. But let's remind ourselves again what this is all about. They are kind of like killing two birds with this stone here. They are what they want people to hear is Kamala Harris is Black and she's a woman, and Joe Biden is going to die. He's so old, right? Yep. That is what this is all about, right? It is not about whether or not the vice president is a good vice president or not, right? First of all, there's no one in that administration who has elevated the abortion issue more than Kamala Harris. So people who think that is an issue Democrats are going to vote on, that is something that she has elevated. It is not about that. It is about she is a Black woman and this is scary. And Joe Biden is old and he's probably going to die. Well, now, that's not what they say, but that is what they want people to hear.
To your point, though, Jen, and Nikki Haley has actually emphasized that when she has said, that this election is not about, is a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris, and quote, that should send a chill down every American spine. Right. And my question is, so why would voting for the Black woman scare you more than voting for the white man?
Or the person who's the president, who, however you feel about it, whether you've watched Veep or not, is more powerful than the vice president. Yes, this is like, and the problem, there's lots of problems with this, but one of the problems is when I hear people talk about this anecdotally, it's like they justify for themselves their own biases, right? And they'll say, the thing is that Kamala Harris just doesn't have that much experience, and Joe Biden is the oldest president. And you're like, I think what you're justifying there for yourself is the fear of a Black woman having power, and also justifying this argument that Joe Biden is old, even though he was literally a senior in college when Donald Trump was a freshman. So like, so I think it doesn't mean it's not going to be effective, even if the data and the focus groups don't show it quite yet. And I think Tim's point is a really important one because, even though everybody has unconscious bias out there in the country, like suburban men and women, white men and women, do not want to be affiliating themselves with clear racism, which this is, right? Even if they have unconscious bias. But I don't know. It is concerning because it's like, does this work at some point? I don't think we know yet.
Don, you're twisting over there a little bit. What's up?
Yeah.
You're squirming in the chair, dude.
Go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
I can't get the fade right if you're moving.
I am heartened by Tim and Jen's point that ultimately it won't penetrate. But unfortunately,
we don't know, Don.
We don't know. We don't know. That's what. Look.
Yeah. All I'm saying is it cut both ways in 2020. That's really what I was saying. This could be a different animal.
We've seen it cut both ways forever. I mean, look, the grab her by the blank tape was out there in 2016, right? And he still won. And so, my experience as a middle class Negro is that I can never count on, I can never count on the demographic we talking about.
No,
right?
You can't
to do the right thing. I can't count on it. Now, Michael, your experience might be different. Frankly, you were an elected statewide. By the way, I just want to point out, for my best cocktail party trick is that I can name every African-American statewide officer that ever existed. And Michael Steele did that a long time ago, way before I started counting. So for you to have pulled off statewide office as a very clear Black man, not trying to tap dance and all of that, maybe your experience in, the particular demographic of Atlanta suburban dad, I guess you call them Bethesda dads, maybe your experience is different, but our actual life experience doesn't suggest that we can count on these messages not resonating. Hillary Clinton is an amazing person who has done remarkable things and by any objective human metric has led an extraordinary life. But she's also been the victim of a 30-year smear campaign, such that good Democrats, good liberals are like, I don't know if Hillary's the one. I don't know if she's likable. And that stuff translates to voting boosts more so than we ever given real credit to. And so in a universe where white men have not voted Democratic since John F. Kennedy, 1960, I can't rely on that. And that's why we have to continue to empower those Black women doing the organizing.
Yeah, Don, I think all of that so important. And first of all, I'm not even betting. We shouldn't bet for white women to vote for the Democratic.
Well, I was going to say
they also don't.
White suburban females have not been the most promising voting bloc for Democrats.
But I think the thing that I've heard that's concerning is I hear a lot of Democrats repeat this talking point about Kamala Harris. So that is the piece that is also concerning, right? Like Democrats will say, well, the challenge is that it's really working, that the argument that, if you vote for Joe Biden, you're electing Kamala Harris. So I think that's also a root problem because you're kind of like taking it on and repeating it as fact and truth. And while we all have to be like eyes wide open, as Tim says, and like really talk about all the things that are alarming, the repetition of that is also working for what the conservatives are trying to do, because Democrats are convincing themselves it's a problem to have Kamala Harris on the ticket when there's no evidence to suggest that's true.
Can I just say, I there's been a little bit of this sort of abortion, and Ben LeBeau's going to start, my buddy is going to start throwing tomatoes at me if he makes it this far in the podcast, but like we could see a little more of Kamala. I know they're doing it. I know we're seeing more of her than we were seeing last year, but I do think that there are going to be some people that are going to be susceptible to this talking point because of unconscious or conscious bias, no doubt. Right. There are other people out there that I think want to be there for Kamala. Some of the Democrats you're talking about, Jen, who are repeating the talking about, some of the independent swing voters, some of the Romney Biden voters, but aren't feel uncertain, right? Because the only thing they're seeing is the gaffe clips that Fox puts up, right? And she's been doing more on abortion. That's good. But I would like to see, I'd like for August 30th to Christmas to see more Kamala. I'd like to see her with Lester Holt.
They need to lean into her leadership more. They need to profile her more. And just
Don saying maybe this is wrong.
No, they do. I mean, but let's keep it 1,000. There are two brothers that went off. There are two brothers. One went off to sea. The other became vice president, and neither were ever heard from again. Right. So historically, the vice presidency is a very, very difficult position from which to establish oneself as leadership. As John McCain once told Sarah Palin, there is no vice presidential campaign. Right. And we have to understand it. So it is a creative alchemy of public affairs, Jen's role, to try to find a role to properly elevate her, but not elevate her above the president, to make her look intellectual, but not like an angry Black woman. All the other stuff comes into play here. I would love to see more of her, but I don't want to see the administration put her in a position where we say, hey, you go solve the border crisis, right? Because that's like saying, hey, go solve Israeli Palestine. That's not a winnable task. And then you set her up to not look like a public success.
But that was not the challenge for Joe Biden or Dick Cheney. They arguably changed, certainly in the modern politics, that vice presidential role from one of a bucket of spit to a partnership, or as close to a partnership as you can get. So why has this been so difficult for the Biden administration to translate her leadership into much more of a partnership role, given the times that we're in, and to narratively position the administration to take on some of the bullshit that's been flying at it? I think they wasted 18 months talking about the filibuster when there were many more important things that Kamala could have been on point about, like we saw with Dick Cheney and we saw with Joe Biden himself. When there was this moment of crisis, the vice president played a narrative role, and hell, even to a great extent with Mike Pence. Mike Pence was a calming salve, even though Trump sort of, kept wiping it off during COVID. When the vice president spoke, people leaned in more and listened on behalf of the administration. So what is it about Kamala that people just can't seem to get right?
I mean,
I don't think people are inclined to hear any type of leadership from a Black woman. A lot of times, that's just fundamentally comes with the territory. But I'll let you go, Jen. You were actually in the room, right?
No. I actually was going to say, I mean, one of the things she was responsible for was the addressing root causes in South American countries related to immigration. That got shorthanded of the border, which she was never in charge of. Nobody assigned her that. But that was exactly what Joe Biden was responsible for early on. So what is that about? Is that about people being more comfortable with Joe Biden in charge of that than Kamala Harris? What's the reason for that? I mean, so my point is there were things that she certainly owned. Now, I do think that in the first couple of, how many years? It's been 3 years. Almost. That I think she has come out and done more, and I think there were at times a fear of making mistakes and screwing up, given who she was and what she represented. That was probably a mistake. And I don't think that came from the Biden side. I know it didn't. I think that was there's a lot resting on her shoulders that I can't even begin to understand, in terms of succeeding and representing what people wanted her to be. And I think what's been good, but it just has not been picked up as much in the world. We all work in media, so maybe we have a role in this, right? Is
a lot happening out there. I don't know if you've
That's true, but is that she has been out there a lot more. Now, I agree also Don's point. It's like, do people want to see her in that role? Also, the vice president, nobody really, maybe this year will be the first time ever, but the pick for the vice president, it doesn't help you win that state. It typically doesn't move voters. It's it's not what we all maybe talk about it to be. Maybe it will be one day. But yeah, I think that there were a lot of factors, and while she's been out there a lot more, I don't think the world has caught up with that. And I do think she was too behind the scenes in the early days, not because anyone told her to, in my experience, but that was because kind of what the choice was.
All right, before I take the wrap off of you and let you out of the chair so you can get on with looking beautiful and doing your thing.
That's for you, Don, and your hair.
That's right.
Cut it.
That's
unless your girlfriend's. Oh, I just almost called her your wife. Your girlfriend.
He's like, from your lips to her ears.
We're just getting to know each other. Here you go.
I want to know more about that.
I love Don. I love love.
I want to stay in the chair a little while longer and learn about that relationship.
Or you said take a little bit more off the top, right?
Can we move on here? I'm sweating.
There you go. So Fani Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, she ain't playing. She's not playing with Trump. She's not playing with the co-defendants. In the last few minutes we got together, what's your read on Georgia? We got a date now for the J6 trial, March 4th. We talked a little bit about the political implications of that. and that's fine. And I don't think any of these trial dates that are being set are going to be the date. There's going to be some sliding because that's just naturally the way the process works. What I'm focusing on is the level of firmness that these DAs are using and holding Trump's lawyers, his team, and Trump himself before we even get into the trial period accountable and sort of curtailing his behavior. Fani is clearly tops in that space. What's your take on what we're seeing out of Georgia, and maybe if any of the other prosecutors or prosecutions looking at how she's playing this card and how the country is responding to it?
I love Georgia. I love Atlanta because Atlanta is the manifestation of what happens when you build an inclusive city starting 60 years ago under the leadership of Maynard Jackson and such. So Atlanta as a metropolitan area has been an incubator for Black talent, and that means Black woman talent as well. So you have a Fani Willis, you have a Judge Tanya Chutkan, who have risen to positions of authority in the legal community, which can show they not playing. Right? You have a Letitia James in New York, but specifically in Atlanta, for him to come down there and do that in Atlanta was a big problem because these are places where Black women have been educated, know the law, and have assumed positions of civic leadership and responsibility, and go down there and fuck around and find out. This is not the place to do that because you have people who are willing to actually hold you accountable, and that's not detached from there being a Stacey Abrams down there or Keisha Lance Bottoms down there, right? You can't do down there what you can do in so many other places and not be held accountable because they're willing to grab them by the collar and say, no, the rules apply to you as well.
Tim, what you think?
Yeah, I look, I just say thank God for Georgia. I don't want to take anything away from Fani, but if you just look at like local elected officials and local leaders really matter. And a lot of times we just kind of gloss that over and say choices don't matter, things are inevitable. If Brian Kemp, Jeff Duncan, Brad Raffensperger, and Fani Willis were not there in Georgia, and you replace them with Marjorie, whoever is the worst person in your imagination, Donald Trump's in a lot better place today. Our democracy's in a lot worse place. So I thank God she's doing that. A different DA might have just done nothing. Right. And she put together this case, which I think everybody, I'm not a legal expert, but all the legal experts I talk to agree is the most threatening to him. Now, we got the election between now and then. So, there are a lot of other ins and outs and what have yous. But I mean, it looks like what she is doing down there is just unbelievable. And we really got lucky in 2024, in 2020, between 2020 and now that we've had those local leaders in Georgia. And I worry, Charlie Sykes wrote about this in his newsletter this morning, Wednesday morning, I worry that at least on the Republican side, that a lot of those types of people are self-selecting out, and we're still going to have some strong local Democratic leaders. But if you're a Republican and you're a normal and you're responsible and you're ethical, you're like, why would I want to do this and be put in this position that Brad Raffensperger got put in? So when I look at Georgia, I'm impressed with Fani, but I think we got lucky with that whole group.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick to your point, Tim, about Charlie's piece. It was titled "Where Are the GOP Heroes Now?" and he focused on, that moment, those moments in places like Georgia with Raffensperger and others. And you make such a critical point there. Jen, what's your thought on that?
Well, also Brian Kemp, I may not agree with him on a lot of policy issues, but he's way more popular than a lot of these like trying to be Trump Republicans. I mean, that's an encouraging thing for the Republican Party. I love that there's this competition for the badassery of these prosecutors and judges. It's just like, I want there to be post-writer strike being resolved, an SNL skit of just like all of them sitting around and shooting the shit and just like seeing what's happening. I mean, because that's just like the fantasy. Just to step back, because everybody's already made so many important points about the legal parts of this, just the role of Georgia in the politics of Donald Trump, right? Let's just remember, he's the first Republican to lose Georgia in how many years? 20, 30 years? Yeah. And not only did he lose Georgia, the day before January 6th, there was these special elections that sent two Democrats to represent those Senate seats, right? And now the politics of the state are just in a shift for a very range of reasons. because there are like an amazing group of like African-American women leaders. It's like the center of that, right? Because there are Republicans who are not Trumpy. Tim's point is fair. There could be crazy ones who emerge. It's such an interesting political, cultural state, but it's such a fascinating political state. And it really could be. It's going to take longer. We all know that because of the approach here and all of the co-defendants. But it could be a big part of Donald Trump's demise, the state of Georgia. So on a range of levels, and that's pretty interesting. We wouldn't have predicted that. Maybe
irony is a bitch.
Yeah.
And we had one other thing today that happened. We have to mention it, that Shane Moss and Ruby Freeman got a big judgment down in Florida today too, and that Rudy Giuliani, if he's got any money left, after all that scotch he's been buying, is going to have to pay up.
Going to have to pay up big. He probably could pay in scotch. I guess he could just
maybe. I bet he's got
give a bottle or two.
I don't know if that pays the bills down there, but
look, I've seen some bottles go for as much as $400 or $500 a bottle. So if he's got enough of them,
start garnishing the scotch.
Interesting.
Garnishing the scotch. Oh my God, Jen Psaki, Don Calloway. And certainly my friend Tim Miller, with whom I have been proud to be in the trenches in the past. Thank you guys so much for coming by and getting a fade, a shade, a touch up, and making us all look good here on the podcast. I really appreciate you.
Great to be here.
All right, folks, that does it for our time together. Look, it's not going to get much better than this. So, just do the download thing over and over again and share the love with all your friends. It makes me feel good. It'll make them feel good, too. Follow Jen on Twitter at JR Psaki. That's Psaki. Follow Don on Twitter at DCS. What is this? DC?
So DCSTL again. I got locked out of DCSTL when Elon made it a hellscape. So it's just DCSTL again.
DCSTL again. I thought it was like a family name, Staligan or something. I just didn't want to mess it up. And my man Tim at Tim ODC. So it's, what was that?
No, Tim? Just giving a peace sign. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. I thought I screwed that up too. All right, folks, till next time, be blessed, be well. We're in the dog days of summer, but we're turning the corner into fall. Enjoy it. Next time will be Labor Day when we get together again. So y'all behave yourselves. And if you're going to have a barbecue, do it right. Just give me a call. I'd be happy to come by. All right. Later, y'all.
See you, Chairman.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Love you so much.